Everyone in Nafferton seemed to get a nickname. There was Jimmel, Donkey, Cack, Pud, Chooky, Sashi, Cannon, Robbo, Tanner, Suey, Panda, Tonner, Peth, Tufty, Smirtle, and so many more. Some days I'd just rock up to the park. It was a hit-and-miss affair if anyone else was there. Tankman was often there alone. He lived near the park with his mum. I'm sure she would encourage him out of the house as often as a single mother to a son would do. Back in 1976, it was a long, dry, hot summer. Standpipes were in use at the close. The Nafferton pond, or mere as it was called, was low. I would have been wearing shorts, an orange Adidas t-shirt, Jesus sandals, and a long bowl haircut as my mum always did my hair. I loved to go on the swing at the park. There we would spit. We often engaged in flagging contests. Great globs of green gauze drawn out of our lung cavities, blown out through rolled-up tongues at force. I'd merrily hum the music to the film 633 Squadron, drop my bombs and jump off. I guess I was different, but happy enough in my comfort bubble. The Second World War had been a significant factor to our parents. You didn't have to scratch the surface before you found some long-lasting impact or story. The signs could be simple stuff like my dad cramming chocolate into his mouth and gobbling it down in one gulp. He always claimed it was due to the deprivation of rationing. His matchbox collection was perhaps a habit due to precious items being in short supply, or the hoarding of everything from empty wine bottles in the shed to every official document he was sent. Subsequently, my generation were cross-pollinated by the nostalgia of events only a few decades previous. I certainly mistrusted anyone driving a German car. This said, my dad was far from patriotic. He often made statements such as, "We only won the war because Hitler's A team were on the Eastern Front," or "Featherstone Rovers B team could beat England Rugby Union team." Politically, he had announced, "The Labour Party are a liberal lie." Sunday lunchtimes were marred often by the sense we lived in a goldfish bowl. This was due to the oversized Georgian bow window in the dining room that looked onto the open plan aspect of the close. We always had the same place at the table, and there was a serving hatch between the kitchen and dining area. Claire, my sister, was forbidden to ever turn round from the table. I faced her and clearly could observe everything behind her happening in the close. This was an irresistible tease as I pretended things were going on behind her. "Claire, turn round!" Often a distraction strategy was deployed by my dad to host a quiz. The trick question was always the same. What was the smallest continent before Australia was discovered? Correct, James, Australia, as it was always there. Often things slid out of control, to which he smacked the table hard and shouted frustratedly, "It's Sunday mealtime again!" It must be said some Sunday lunches had been more marred by Jasper the dog getting hold of the roast, often leaving skate-like scratch marks on the French-polished mock Regency dining suite. It's almost impossible to imagine having a single static telephone now, but ours was situated in the hallway and set on the wall. Dad was forbidden by my mum to ever answer it during lunchtimes, and his evening calls from colleagues that were often created tensions. Mum would often shout, "If it's X or Y, tell them to pee off!" Clearly it was a tension at home because Dad was married to his job and found it hard to ever switch off. I don't think he helped himself as he frequently brought work home. At 9 p.m. on Sunday evenings, having slept off the self-medication gulped at lunchtime, he sat and worked through an in-tray of memos, letters, correspondences and minutes from meetings. Work details that in today's world would have been electronically generated emails. This workflow, I can imagine, was secondary to the way Dad would have worked, his primary focus being talking and meeting people, problem solving and diplomacy, and importantly moving mountains for people, which is what managers used to do. Unfortunately, moving a mountain for someone else at work often resulted in an administrative backlog and some heavy lifting after work at home, eating into the balance of family life. A drinker he was, but workaholic was more the reality of things. Dad always maintained he evaded national service in the immediate post-war period due to having flat feet. There was always a curveball thrown into the mix about some counter-espionage agenda. He'd tell me fantastic stories about Professor Horatio Bottomley and a flying propelling pencil he surfed the skies on, and his special equipment called an autotautoscope. He lived in a place called the Eyeball Castle on the island of Sing Sing. But of course there were germs of truth in many strange things Dad said, and Horatio really was a figure from history, and was an outspoken editor of the World War I period magazine John Bull, and tautology is a form of written style, and subsequently a propelling pencil would have all made perfect sense as a possible bullshit detector. Looking back, I realise it was true that most things he came out with were beyond the understanding of most people, and clearly it would take a lifetime to unpick Dad's life. The reality was that my dad had been visited by MI6 during his initial postgraduate days from London School of Economics and interviewed about associations he had made with communist, subversive characters he'd known in London. Being a founder member of the Socialist Worker Party while living in London as a student, he had taken in McCarthyite expulsions from the United States and helped them get housed and integrated. This had included the young actor Sam Wanamaker. According to a close old friend, I have since found out that my dad swiftly reinvented himself, disassociated himself from certain people, and conformed because he was petrified by the visit from MI6. Thus commenced his own covert struggle to hide from the past. He always told me, "Hide the evidence, James." Dad's party trick in the student days was to turn his collar round and pretend to be a vicar in the pub, or introduce himself to people in the pubs of London as a consultant doctor. Often these antics led to accounts of near-miss incidents of being found out. To illustrate, when he once claimed to work for the electric grid in a pub in York, and a power cut actually happened, or having claimed being a doctor, a man fainted in the pub and all eyes fell on Dad. Often on trips to London, his old roommate, a successful Harley Street physician, would invite him to sit in on consultations with private patients. The client list extended from the Shah of Iran to Bette Midler. Dr. Bolton, I presume. Not only years before Dad died in 2005, I recall him combing his hair into a strange shape and waited with a wry, cheeky smile for me to look up and notice his rearranged hair that had been mischievously sculpted into a strange pointing fringe, and he laughed and said, "It's latent schizophrenia." Back in 1977, I was sat in my back garden under a large ash tree with a set of girls and boys playing True Dare, Kiss or Promise. Not my choice of entertainment. However, I had my first snog that day. It was also the same day that Elvis died. It was the 16th of August, and village life and rock and roll would never be quite the same again. Elvis hits the TV charts once more. It was our first colour TV set, and it was rented from Fenton's electrical store in town. Earlier that year, before the summer vacation, it had been the Queen's Silver Jubilee. The school gave all the pupils brown Hornsey pottery cups and a silver commemorative crown worth 25 new pence, just enough for 10 players number 6 from the Spar shop, which was a source of great disapproval the next day at school from Mr. Brass, the headmaster. I started Driffield Secondary School in the September of 1977. 1N was the form, and this was a big step, meeting all the kids from village schools, separated from most of my old peers. New boy again, but we were all new, and thus the field was level. 30 headless 11-year-olds. These early school years can be summarised as a fusion between the pop songs Into the Valley by the Skids with Baggy Trousers by Madness, a blend of angst, laughter and complete stupidity, so much so we were all separated by year 4 as a critical mass of antics had accrued, and despite being given the toughest disciplinarian teacher in school as our form teacher, Tony Corky Balls Corscadden. Set amongst the gentle rolling Wolds landscape, Nafferton, like many other quintessential village settings, boasted its own cricket field. The sound of leather-clad cork against willow is as rich a resonant and therapeutic sound as the first glug of wine from any bottle. Nafferton was very much a place of sporting endeavour. Its recreation field offered football pitches, tennis courts, cricket and bowls. If you were any good at any sport, you were always held in high esteem. Like the song by the Kinks, Davy Watts pointed out, being good at football was a draw, but to be captain of the football team is an androgynous aphrodisiac. Football was a game of the street, close and park. I had a brief dabble at playing for the village Sunday League side that was ran by Basil and Brian, two dedicated, long-suffering local dads who were a bit like the football commentators, the Saints and Greavesy. Reviewing those times, looking back, long before people started taking kids' sport seriously, were ace. We just rolled up at games, no risk assessment, no first aid, no parental consent, no training or forward strategy. We sat on milk crates in borrowed vans, smoking cigarettes both to and from the match. My parents had no inclination where I was. Clearly, some real local talent was nurtured in those teams, and some of the lads went on into semi-professional or even professional careers. To me, it was all like a deleted scene out of the film Cares, always cold, wet, windy, and left me wondering why I'd ever been placed as centre forward, having scored only 2 goals in my career, whilst playing on the left wing.
Chase it! Kick it! Get it! Come on! Come on! Football! Pass it! Over here! You fouling! Ref! Come on! No way! Yeah, no way! On the head! My ball! Can I go in goal? Baz, please.
Anyone can kick a ball, but you need composure and a full helical awareness of where your team are, and that was something I hadn't in Stoves. All our sporting lives were supported in Driffield by Woolworths, Phillips and Mallinsons, and for the horsey types there was Poole's Saddlery, all regrettably long since gone. Like many kids, it was a treat to go every season down to Phillips to get boots, shoes or trainers. I loved the feeling of my feet, of the measuring machine, the soft touch and its brief tickle, and the overwhelming smiling banter of the proprietors, the Phillips brothers. The Adidas Beckenbauer Super Football boots were a major contribution to my increasing arsenal of branded attire, despite the Jesus sandals and shorts. Mallinson's was a different affair, but always a helpful, happy service by Mr. Wilson. It was a place to buy a knife or fishing tackle. A slightly older, more adult-themed place with shooting and other accessories. The kind of shop you'd attend if contemplating insurrection, suicide or murder. Oh, and fishing. Good old Woolies was always great for basic fishing tackle and anything else you could care to think of. Winfield was their popular brand name. One year, owning knives seemed to be the trend. I think Mallinson's had done very well that year. One lad in the village, Robbo, had bought a Jim Bowie knife, and it looked massive. Its blade was the thing to behold, and it was thrown into the side of the cricket pavilion wooden panels. Someone else had a set of weighted throwing knives. For a while, flick and lock knives were the must-have items. This was my introduction to the game of splits. Unfortunately, it did not take long to have the obvious accident of a knife in the toe, but nothing too bad. Clearly, we'd all been watching the Magnificent Seven or the Alamo. Briefly, the compass of the Jipes had gone from fighting out Stalingrad in the Eastern Front to West Side Story. Fishing became an obsessive pursuit for myself and many of the boys in the village and school. Here I bonded with Mark Chukey Slater, and we often cycled to venues to fish. It was much to everyone's amusement that my dad would arrive at lunchtime with my bespoke prepared lunch. I'd got the brown rice and the sandals, but by then I'd also a pair of black waders. Chukey often referred to me as a herd of elephants running between fishing pegs. Chukey was pretty much the best footballer and all-round sportsman in the village. His dad, Harry, was a war hero, and on his return back home he had commenced a building firm. Chuke's mum was Scottish, and he had strawberry blonde hair and fair complexion and freckles. He had a fabulous sense of humour, an infectious laugh. Those were golden days in the summer sun, and we dreamed of hooking into monster-sized fish down at some lakes collectively called Emmetland near the village of North Frodingham. There we would while away our prepubescent childhood, casting our lines of hope into the rippling gravel-bed ponds. Giant mirror carp basked upon the surface of the shimmering meniscus, and dragonflies darted between the trees and lilies. My sister Claire was about 14 years old when the boyfriend started calling round. The cream egg was a relative newcomer to the corner shop at this stage, but as you can imagine, bribes did become part of my new survival strategies. Along with them came the chance to go further afield on weekends, to dances, as every older sibling will angrily bear out. Once they push the boundaries over, all the hard work is done in terms of parental resistance, and all the better for us younger ones to exploit. Very soon, every leather-clad 50cc moped rider seemed to arrive at our kitchen. I must admit, they were all very decent youths and friendly, despite looking like they'd just stepped out of the film set of The Wild Bunch. All the gang of bikers took to my dad, and he held court, getting hands-on assistance from anyone in the vicinity to make his home brew wine and beer. The Nafferton Youth Club was run every week on weekday nights by Brian Howe, the village policeman. We played darts, table tennis and pool. On Friday